I was struck by Lee Daniels' Empire, like it or not.
Actor Anthony Mackie says people are tired of talking about race.
More N-word BS, this time out of Paris.
A single 40-year-old sister from Houston, Texas, marries herself. I'm Anthony Harris.
I'm Cleo Monago.
And you're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast, Truth from the Other Side. Greetings, and as always, as we do here on the PR Podcast, in honor of the brilliant Frances Cress Welsing, Cleo, do you know what's happening?
I think I do, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well, brother. I'm doing well, and believe it or not, apparently I and you, we survived the major snowstorm that was supposed to hit the Northeast.
Yeah, I did survive it. Lots of white snow.
Well, there's I believe the reason why you bring, I think there's maybe some metaphor that you're trying to point out there by mentioning that.
Of course.
Okay. Well, as always, a lot to talk about here on the PR Podcast. I think that we should start where we kind of left off, or some of the things we talked about last week, because we both have had the opportunity to actually watch the television series directed by Lee Daniels, starring Terrence Howard and Taraji P. Henson, Empire. So you got a chance to actually see it. I saw it at the coercing of a friend. So share your thoughts in terms of what you think about by actually seeing it now.
Well, I saw it too, and just the whole idea was traumatizing for me because I had comfortably planned never to see it and going about my business. And then I got a call from Roland Martin to talk about it on his show, and I didn't want to go on there not knowing nothing about the show on national TV, so I was forced to watch it, and it was almost like volunteer rape. I did not enjoy watching it. I had my premonitions about it, being that Lee Daniels made it, given, as we've spoken before, what tends to occur in his films regarding black people, and he stayed true to form. This film has all kinds of problems in it concerning black people. But you said you saw it, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I did see it. I saw the most recent episode, and that was the first time I'd seen it as well. The most recent episode, the only one time that I saw it. A couple of things, and I'd be honest with you, I had never seen anything that Lee Daniels had done. I didn't go see Precious, didn't see The Butler, didn't see Monsters Ball. So, I know of him, and he's not someone that I would flock to go see anyway, based on the basic storylines. But as far as Empire, a couple of things. Just from knowing you and communicating with you over the years that I've known you, you have enlightened me on some things that I may have subconsciously felt and wasn't able to articulate, and have brought them more to the fore of my mind and made them very prevalent in terms of how I live and what I'm aware of. So as a result of that, the whole masculinity issue involving black men and their resistance or not accepting of homosexuals, you made me critically aware of that because you and I have done several documentaries on the topic. So through that lens, I'm now watching Empire, and Terrence Howard, the main character, is, as we talked about last week, one of his sons is homosexual, and he has a major issue with that. Now, that's not unusual because, I have a daughter, and when I found out that I had a daughter, the fact that she may become homosexual, which she's not, is not something that entered the realm of my mind. I did not think about that possibility. I thought of her being a happy woman, and I'm sure as a man who has a child, who has a son, I don't have a son, a man who has a son, and that's not something that he thinks about. He doesn't think about the possibility of his son becoming homosexual. Perhaps through programming, he thinks that his son will be a strong football player or whatever. So to be rocked by something like that, there's going to be some period of adjustment. Yeah. I say all that to say, and those of you who have watched any of the series, you are aware that the character Terrence Howard is battling an illness. I believe he has ALS, and he's keeping it under wraps. But through filming, Lee Daniels has snuck that into the subconscious of your mind and know that he's dealing with ALS. My question and my critique is how come Lee Daniels couldn't show us the angst, the real angst, the human being angst that Terrence Howard's character is dealing with, knowing that his son is homosexual? How come that can't be slipped? And through knowing you, Cleo, you've presented the historical issues that black people, black men deal with in terms of their hostility or their angst regarding homosexuality, rightly or wrongly. So my question is, why couldn't Lee Daniels just say, okay, let me slip this in here. He's dealing with this. Because if you watch it, and I only watched it once, there are several flashback moments that they take you through in the film. As a matter of fact, in the most recent one, before the empire began, quote unquote, he's playing guitar and his son is singing songs. So how come there can't be a flashback into some historical, cultural challenges that black men face regarding dealing the fact that their son is homosexual? Show us that conflict, that struggle, that human being struggle that he may be really dealing with, as opposed to just the anger. I went a long way there. I hope I was clear. Your thoughts, Cleo?
Well, that's a fascinating consideration that you just mentioned and question. Why don't he deal with the developmental issues and context regarding the father figure's challenges with homosexuality? But I think and I've heard this from other sources, that the anti-homosexual father conflict with his son is based on Lee Daniels' experience. I was told, as a matter of fact, I saw the first 3 episodes all in one night because I saw it all because the guy who I was going to be on the show with is an empireologist, and I wanted to know what the heck I was going to be talking about. But anyway, I saw the scene where the homosexual child was thrown in a trash can, which was a very interesting scene. The reason I raised that is because, and I raised the issue that this might be Lee Daniels' life, is Lee Daniels, and you can tell by his other movies, he doesn't humanize black people much. He doesn't put black people in context to be understood much. And he's mad at his father in real life. He's angry about so-called homophobia, and he has said that he's going to use this show to knock the lid off of, I think that's the quote, throw the lid off and knock the lid off of homosexuality. So he's angry and mad about homosexuality. And in his own life, like the character in the film, he's with a non-black, could pass for white partner. So a lot of times when black people are like that and they make life decisions based on that angst and that anti-black or black wound, they don't put black people in context, because if they did, and didn't have a blind spot, their lives would be different. And the things they do and say and express would be different. So maybe, who knows, maybe this whole thing will be cathartic for Lee Daniels. Maybe he heard my comments on Roland Martin's show, or maybe he heard Parallel Reality. You never know who's listening to us. And he might get because this is unique for him to be in a TV situation where he has to have somebody write a new script every week and blah, blah, blah. So who knows? But I don't expect somebody who has what I call anti-black tendencies to humanize and contextualize fully why somebody would be anti-homosexual. Another thing that happens in the film, too, and if you still have issues around the homosexuality, I want you to continue that, but I want to say this real quick, is that the mother figure has a assistant named Portia, who's dark-skinned. Sidibe, the woman, Gabby Sidibe, I think her name is, right, who played in Precious, is the assistant to the Terrence Howard character. And then there was this guy named Bunky, who was a gangster friend of Terrence Howard's character, who he kills. And then there's a barber who is kind of assistant type to one of the boys. And they're all treated really badly and told to go away and get out of here and shoo. And they're dark-skinned. Right. And so they create a subservient position of all the dark-skinned people who are in the film, except for Naomi Campbell, who plays the mother-age girlfriend of
the jump off,
who he calls Mama, and he's of course crazy, got issues, and reckless. Mm-hmm. And the only one they show loving somebody black and it's a weird relationship, but everybody else is loving somebody who could pass for white or who's actually white.
Yeah,
those are classic Lee Daniels traits.
Yeah, no, I'm co-signing on what you're saying, and I'm just jumping in to say that again, I had never seen any Lee Daniels production before. I had heard stuff about it, and again, through my relationship with you and through knowing you and working on projects with you, you've enlightened me to a lot of these things that I was maybe subconsciously aware of, but they were never brought to the fore. I say all that again to co-sign on what you just said, because the Terrence Howard's son, the Miss Justin Smollett, he light skin, as you said, but his character is seen with integrity, because he's not willing to take the money from his father because his father doesn't accept him who he is. It's so dimensional. It's given so much power so much strength, and again, just so much dimension that it's like, wow, you could not have done that for anyone else. I mean, it's like, wow, this is seen only really through this person's lens in terms of dimension, and it's quite sad and quite unfortunate to see that.
Yeah, well, this might be sound real petty, but it's interesting that Lee Daniels' character type is some light-skinned person, because Lee Daniels is hardly light-skinned, but I guess he wish he was. Right, and
just to go back, because we're going to have a larger discussion on how self-hate turns on itself as we move along in this this edition of the Parallel Realities podcast. But I just wanted to point out, because you said earlier that a lot of what Lee Daniels is depicting on this Empire series is what he himself experienced. So perhaps, and the sister Maria Lloyd, she wrote a very fascinating article, and we hope to get her on soon to discuss this on the program. She wrote a very interesting article saying that perhaps, and this is a strong perhaps with multiple qualifiers, Lee Daniels, and even you said it, is getting some sense of catharsis through doing this, and perhaps something transformational can take place within him. But the whole gist of her article and your premise is that Lee Daniels needs to get help.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, I have a lot of reactions to this whole thing, so let me relax and breathe correctly. Because a lot of black people are being sold on this, and Fox is claiming that black people really love this show, and supposedly the Murdoch support of it, or initiation of a second year of funding or support before the first season is finished, is based on black interest in the show, which is a lie. And I'm saying that straight up, because the press and the media has never done anything based on black interest, and they've never done anything driven by what the black populace wants. Because if they did, they would always have had black shows, and Arsenio Hall would still be on TV, except for those decrepit white men that we got to see if we up that late. It's all out of whack, and they're pushing this on black people. Black people are watching it more and more because they're being told that they're missing something if they don't, because everybody else black likes it, and this whole thing is being pushed on black people, and it's about a drug family, and it's just very frustrating, because now there's black people defending it and getting mad at the other black people who don't like it, and nobody is critiquing the things that we're talking about, and everything we're saying is true. We're not making it up when we talk about our concerns about this show.
Yeah, I think some of I can't speak to whether Fox's polling numbers are correct or not, but what I will say, and we touched on this last week, what I will say is that I do believe there's a segment in our community that is eating this show up, because again, as I said last week, they're seeing themselves. It's so rare that we get to see ourselves in this primetime mainstream primetime airwaves. So they're eating it up and loving it, and they're just appreciating. And let's just be honest, I said to you off camera, one of the benefits of seeing it is Taraji Henson. I think she's a gorgeous woman. Seeing her, and maybe for some others, there may be some other eye candy that they like seeing. So, people are eating it up based on those terms. I'll look at pictures of Taraji Henson. I won't see Empire anymore if I need to do that. But yeah, I think that may be some of the reality, some of the interest that's building up in our community over the series, without, again, as you said, without any critical thinking taking place.
Yeah, and it's tragic, because instead of simply allegedly being excited about this movie, we should be collectively demanding that there's more of us on TV, that there's more roles, that there's more diversity, not diversity in our race, but diversity in settings in which we're, like, for example, can we have a black family in a non-comedy show that's not selling drugs or have anything to do with being in jail and being criminals and killing people?
You're listening to the Parallel Realities Podcast. Are you familiar with the actor Anthony Mackie?
Yes, I am. I mean, there's not enough actors out there on TV to get them all mixed up. And he's one of one of the few that gets a gig. Yes, okay. I know who he is.
Okay, well, he recently made some comments regarding the snub by that Selma director Ava DuVernay and the actor David Oyelowo faced in terms of the Academy Awards. I'll just read a couple of comments that he made. People are just tired of being bombarded with race night right now, so everybody is shying away from certain topics in certain movies. This is what Anthony Mackie said. And in regards to, and in this, let's just read a few more quotes. If you look at all the movies and actors that are nominated, they all gave damn good performances. Me specifically, if that's something I want, I have to step my game up. I have to do better movies, and I have to act better. Now, let me just stop for a second. The awards process is basically subjective, so I don't know how far you step your game up. Is it going to be approved or loved by a lily white organization? But I'll continue. He made some more comments, because he made some comments about wearing of locks. Men and women, black sisters and brothers wear their hair in locks, and he made a comment here. Regarding profiling, racial profiling by the police and the killing of unarmed black men and black people. Like my nephew wanted to grow dreadlocks, Anthony Mackie says. I'm like, fine, I'll sit you down and I'll watch the first 48 TV show with you, and everybody you see on that show that's doing something wrong, they're black dudes with dreadlocks. So do you want to be seen as part of the problem, or do you want to be an individual? And lastly, in regards to the killings of Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Mike Brown, and even Tamir Rice, he goes on to say they were killed because of their hair. And he further explains, let's just say you have locks and you're walking down the street. The police pull you over and say you fit the description of somebody. You start yelling and arguing with the cops. Next thing you know, you're pressed up against the wall, going to jail for something you're not even involved in, just because you look like somebody and you don't know how to handle yourself. Any thoughts, Cleo?
I'm trying to get my barf bag out the way. Pardon me. Man, that's sickening. I mean, what can I say? He's sickening. Poor guy, just a delirious victim of white supremacy. And, you know, like I said, it's not a whole lot of people who get work. He gets work. And as far as I'm concerned, now we know one of the reasons why. He probably has mastered kissing white butt. Because that's what that comment is. And it's very dehumanizing and racist. He sounds like a damn Klan member. What you laughing at over there? Anyway.
Well, what even makes it further sad is that he's inaccurate. Black people aren't catching hell because of how we wear our hair. Because if you look at the facts of the last 6-8 months, Mike Brown did not have dreadlocks.
I know.
Tamir Rice, 12 years old, did not have locks. Yeah. Eric Garner, we saw him get choked to death. He did not have locks. So what's your point? Right. What's your point, Anthony Mackie?
His point is that he's anti-black, because when he says we're boggled down with racism, he's not talking about black people. He's talking about white people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when he says that stuff about we, he has superimposed himself into a white consciousness. And I saw him on a YouTube spot some years ago basically, I forgot the quote, so it's been a while, but he basically was saying the same thing back then. He's very much a classic white accommodationist, and who is very, very interested in disassociating from black people in direct ways. And when you get to that disorienting state of mind of wanting to disassociate from what you are, of course you say stuff that's not true to make your point, like Larry Elders does, like Armstrong Williams does, like other people do. Mm-hmm. Their comments are not true,
right?
And racism itself is based on myths, and one of the core myths is a superiority to black people. Mm-hmm. So it's an irrational, hallucinatory white supremacist psychosis, and unfortunately, this young brother is suffering from it.
Okay, well, let's contrast that with the movie that he's currently playing in. Some of you may have seen ads for it on television or whereabout. He is now playing in the movie Black or White, starring Kevin Costner, and he plays the brother of. It's a biracial movie, adoption, and that whole thing. But the movie is, I guess, it's right out of the Can We All Just Get Along handbook, and it's very interesting movie when you see it. And he made some comments regarding that movie. That he thinks is he says, the most specific and the smartest that I've read about the issue in terms of the movie dealing with race in his eyes. With me, race is very important. It's not about those who are told to change. It's not about those who are too old to change. It's about the kids who can grow up and identify with a completely different idea of what the other person across the room is expressing. Kids are born blank states, and we've made it our job to mess them up. That's the whole point of the movie. Nobody was fighting for their own good. Everybody was fighting about what they thought was best for the little girl. I had never read that before. I had never experienced someone who wrote exactly how I feel as a father with 2 children. Everything I read about my character was something I wanted to say. Any thoughts, Cleo?
Well, thank you for the warning. I'm not going to be seeing that. Well, I don't have much to say. I mean, we've already talked about this dude, but what I'm tripping off of is all these movies about race, quote unquote. You heard about this film called Dear White People, right?
Yeah. Well, it's written. Yeah. It's been out for a while. It's like a satire, if you will. Yeah.
Oh, it's a satire. Okay. Well, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. It's from a black. It's kind of like if we were at the coffee table. I'm a black person and you're a white person, and I'm telling you about the stuff you do that I don't like. That's basically what it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I'll say, I think you've already implied it about the film you just described that has that guy in it, whatever his name is. What's his name again? Anthony something?
Anthony Mackie.
Anthony Mackie, somebody who don't want to deal with race. He's in a movie about race. So
well, it's from a perspective that he likes. So therefore,
yeah,
he condones it. Well, anyway, let's move on. Let's move on because there's more stuff. Recently, the designer, a European designer, had a fashion show in Paris, and he had some white models wear Timberland boots, baggy pants, I guess, kind of like sweatpants, and overcoats. And then in front of them, he held a placard, a card that said, "Last N-words in Paris." The designer's name is Jean Tuitu, I believe is how you pronounce it, and he received some heat from it, but he had some comments as to why he did it, because a website wanted further comments, further clarity on why he decided to do this. And this is what he said: "I made looks which are a crossover of those 2 references. The Timberland shoes and the sweatpants are iconic of hip-hop, and the camel hair color coat worn with nothing under it is iconic of that precise movie." The precise movie is Last Tango in Paris. "I'm friends with Kanye West, who recorded N-Words in Paris with Jay-Z, and he and I presented a joint collection at the same place 1 year ago, and that this thing is only a homage to our friendship. As a matter of fact, when I came up with this idea, I wrote to him with the picture of the look and the name I was giving to it, and he wrote back immediately saying something like, quote unquote, 'I love this vibe.'" So here we are again, Cleo, confronted with N-word usage being thrown right back in our face.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no reason, unfortunately, not to. I mean, we don't protest its use, and we use it. So, and so does Kanye and Jay-Z use it. So, I mean, we're giving it everybody license, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, it's terribly unfortunate because, again, there's no perspective given to it. There's no dimension given to it, and it continues to happen. And it's almost to the point where it's just the way it is.
Yeah, and while it's just the way it is, the word still has damaging impact on the black psyche. It feeds into a tendency for us to dehumanize ourselves and be dehumanized, and also there's postmodern renditions of the same word, which is ghetto, which has a black poster child context, which is the meaning of people. So yeah, the beat goes on, and white supremacy's success at making it normal language to put down black people is still going.
Well, you see what happened a couple of weeks ago when a certain segment of Muslims had a major issue. At least this is what we're told. A certain segment of Muslims had a major issue with the satirist Charlie Hebdo and their depiction of Muhammad. They had issues with that, and they took it to a level that made people think about wanting to use it again. I'm not justifying that. I'm not condoning it, if that is indeed the reality. I'm just saying that these are people saying, yo, you're not going to call us that, and or you're not going to depict us like that, and we got a problem with it.
Yeah, it must be nice not having been enslaved for 400 years. That must be nice. Because we have, and the consequences of that are the normalized use of the creation of the N-word by white folks, and our normalized use of it, and our other people using it.
All right, let's move on to another topic, our last topic in this segment. Self-love is something that we've often discussed, Cleo. And 40-year-old Yasmin Elby in Houston, Texas, took it to a very deep level. She's a 40-year-old woman, and some of you may be familiar with the Lifetime movie that came out this past weekend, I believe, or came out recently, called With This Ring, where Eve, the rapper, Jill Scott, and several, I believe Gabrielle Union, want to get married. These are black women reaching a certain age wanting to get married. Well, Yasmin Elby falls in that same line, which many women do. She's 40 years old, single, and she wanted to get married. So she did not reach that state in her life. So she married herself in a big ceremony in Houston, Texas, at an African-American museum there, and had a big ceremony. And this is why she did it. The ceremony is not about me being bitter for not having a man. It wasn't like, okay, I'm upset with that I'm 40 and don't have a man. I wanted to show myself my self-love, my self-worth, my self-respect. It was always about me loving me. When God sends me my husband, he will come, but until then, I'm okay with it just being with me. Any thoughts?
Well, people have all kinds of coping mechanisms, bless her heart. She's trying to feel affirmed independently and fulfill a dream of being married, and good for her. I just hope that she don't one day need a divorce. Because that's going to be problematic.
Well, I applaud the sister because self-love is important, and sometimes people get married for the wrong reason and then are unable to cope when involved in the marriage process. So I applaud her. I applaud her for at least for the self-love recognition and putting that out there, and hopefully some other people can see what she's saying. And maybe not take it as extreme, but and maybe extreme is a poor choice of words on my part. But I think it's great. She took a lot of heat. Some people laughed, as you and I just did. Some people laughed and wrote it off. But I don't think we're laughing at her. We're laughing at the process, I believe. But the self-love part of it is I think it should be pointed out.
Applaud.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Should be applauded significantly. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I hear you, and you sound like a romantic. And And when you marry yourself, can I go to the wedding?
Well, I've already married myself.
Oh, okay.
But I just didn't have the ceremony. I just haven't had the ceremony. I don't. But again, Jasmine Elby in Houston, Texas. She and just to wrap up here, she was asked, what does she think about some of the words and reactions from people. She says some of them didn't believe me. They thought I was joking, but once I explained it to them what it would be about, they were supportive in talking about her friends. Not very many people knew it was a wedding. It was kind of a surprise. The invitations just said, come celebrate my birthday in a unique way. I'd invited 2 of my exes. They were both happy for me. They were excited about it once they got there and realized what was happening. So that's great that she had a support group, number one, and she was able to do it. So that sounds affirming, and moving on, she seems to be well adjusted. So hopefully things work out for Yasmin Elby.
Bless her heart. Congratulations. Okay.
You're listening to the Parallel Realities podcast, Truth from the Other Side. I guess it's a good segue coming off of the Yasmin Elby story, the 40-year-old woman from Houston, Texas, who loved herself so much and affirms herself so much that she actually married herself, to talk about what self-hate can do in terms of Black self-hate and how we turn on ourselves in many different ways. We can be the CEO at a major company or thriving in so many areas of your life, but still not love ourselves. Or you could be a struggling person on the street at any level you want to think of, and still hating oneself. So Cleo, can you just explain to me, in as brief as you possibly can, how does that manifest, number one, and two, how does it result in turning on oneself?
Oh, you want me to do that briefly? Okay. That's the challenging part.
Forgive me. Well, you can take it one at a time. Take it one at a time.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll do a full canvas contextual thing. Black people are born in a media, educational, political, social, and standard of beauty system that affirms whiteness and close to whiteness. All children, regardless of race, including Black people, are born into that context. And Black people are coming out of a situation of slavery not that long ago, where one of our survival tactics have been to assimilate. And part of being able to endure assimilation is to act like there's no racism. And one of the theories that a lot of Black people had, unfortunately, was if we don't talk to our children about racism, they'll be protected from it. We'll just tell them to get a good job, act right, and do things in a way behaviorally that white people will approve of, and you'll get a good job and you'll do well. Well, what's problematic about that recommendation is the anti-Black attack and its impact on self-concept is not addressed. So there's a lot of Black people as youth who become ambushed by all the racism, and they're not prepared to synthesize it, analyze it, critically analyze it specifically, and wind up becoming neurotic and anti-Black as recommended. So then you have terms, as we've talked about before, like N-words, ain't, SH, etc. I hope people in the audience understand what I'm saying. Black people always do when I say it like that because they say it so much. But Black people ain't nothing. Act your age, not your color. Sit your Black butt down. and you're so black and blah, 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 blah. Then you watch Lee Daniels films, all of them, which reiterate the implication that dark-skinned people are really not as good as light-skinned people. And so there's this whole messaging and whole canvas and context, which is normalized, which teaches us that myth. And then we act it out. And like you said, some of us in our ambitious goals become white enough for acceptance. Like for as far as I'm concerned, it's Lee Daniels' tendency to defile black people and marry not black people that makes him acceptable to white people. Therefore, he gets to make a show like Empire and glorify lightness all over again, which is what he's doing. So there's this vicious cycle that we're trained to be silent about. And because we're silent, we're standing in line with popcorn to watch self-hating films. Now we get to do it at home through Empire. And it's easy in the United States to be a black person who winds up hating themselves or being anti-black. It's extremely easy. Just like it's extremely easy to look at women as potential objects or to be controlled by men and be at men's beck and call. That is also normalized in this culture. And there's other oppressive thoughts and ways of behaving that this country reinforces. But it's especially white supremacists. Women are getting some rights. There's been focus on what women go through and been legislation and even bills passed, included by Obama, for women to have equal wages, which they deserve, and for there to be focused on countering the oppression of women. But he did not counter the oppression or bring voice to what black people go through specifically at all in his talk. And I raised that because it's an example of what we're living with.
I feel you on that. So what can be done to circumvent this campaign, so to speak, that's been going on for years, centuries perhaps even, that forces this self-hate? Because what happens here is that the people who have orchestrated this whole thing, white supremacy and racism, they can pull back and just sit and watch while the destruction occurs. And when after a period of time, you won't even see their hands in there, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, the best we can do is what we have been doing, or this is my perception, because it's a huge multi-million-dollar machine, billion-dollar machine called the media, and it's white and it's racist and it's powerful, and it's a lot more present in the world, let alone locally in this country, than anything else. So all people can do is collectively create counter media devices and interfaces like the YouTube and like the videos that we've done. For example, the documentary that we did, Manhood, Black Manhood and Sexuality, Sexual Diversity, whatever it's called, you can correct me in a minute. It's still impacting people to this day. So I've raised that with you in terms of what we can do about it as an example of what can be done to get community response. To this day, I get email and Facebook messages about the impact of that film, 37-minute film, on people's lives and thinking, including some very moving testimony from heterosexual men who, for example, talked about how abusive they were to homosexuals and didn't realize why and hadn't thought about why. And that film brought voice to their unconscious. And they saw themselves in that critique, and now they are checking themselves. Well, as you know, we got work to do around the same issue that you're talking about in video. And all we can do is recommend other artists and commentators and leaders to make talking about white supremacy and unlearning it a part of their spiel. Right. Because the media ain't gonna do it, because they reinforce white supremacy to stay in power.
Right. Well, and again, this is as we always try to do here. We try to keep everything. We connect many dots, so to speak, and everything is related in some way. So actually, this may come off as Cleo and I having a discussion, which we really are. There is some structure here. So there was a reason why we put Anthony Mackie in there. There's a reason why we have the sister who married herself. And now we're talking about self-hate. And there was a reason why the N-word story was popped in there. All of this is contextualized. And all we just really want the listeners to do is just to think critically. And we're not trying to be right or wrong. We're not sitting on some mountain saying, yo, we are the dope, and what we're saying is true, and only listen to us. No, view it with a lens and with a discerning eye. One thing go ahead.
Like I said, that's Anthony's opinion. I think we are on a mountain, and you guys need to listen to what we're saying.
I'm not on the mountain. There are no mountains in Harlem.
You live at least 20 stories up, right?
No, I don't. There are no mountains in Harlem. Anyway, well, okay, but let's flip it though. Anthony Mackie is tired of discussing race, and I don't think he's the only black person in the world that's sick of having that discussion. What do you say to someone like that? I mean, what do you if you were to sit down and have a conversation and not a dismissive one? What do you say to someone like that?
Well, I don't have dismissive conversations, so let me make that clear. But I've heard that before, and what I say to I heard it 2 days ago, and what I say to them is, I agree. I'm tired of it too. So why don't we stop racism?
And what's their comeback? And
then they get a little confused because that's not what they mean. What they mean is, let's not deal with it. Let's move on. And I'm saying, well, I'm tired of racism too. And then I go down a short list of of modern day contemporary examples of racism that they cannot deny. And then they get a little confused because, see, what hasn't happened with Anthony Mackie and those people is somebody sitting them down and giving them examples of racism that cannot be denied, or talking to their fatigue. Because I can understand even why Anthony Mackie and anybody would be tired of the issue. People assume that people like you and I are consumed with racism, and some people might even call us so-called race baiters, or there's a term that they call Al Sharpton sometime, a race agitator. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And what people assume, because they're so much in denial about racism and have such a short lens, is that we wake up in the morning just hungry and can't wait to talk about racism. And as you know, that's not the case. What we want to do, and why we do what we do, is hopefully to make it less of a problem. You know, we want to be less deterred by it and having to deal with it as little as possible. We want black people not to be murdered by the cops. We want the media to show balance around ways of being as black, etc. We want to see black on black love and black people loving each other without a laugh track. You know, Anthony Mackie won't raise those issues because he's so busy being influenced and seduced by whiteness.
Okay, I want to cut right to it, Anthony, because please you have one of the most cutting lines in this whole film, and I wrote it down so I can get it word for word. You're a goddamn cliche. You validate everything the white community thinks.
Right. And that line is the reason I did the movie.
Seriously?
100%.
Please expand. Tell
me.
You
have two lines in this movie that are extremely important. You're a goddamn cliche. You validate what white people thinks. And it's not your first thought that makes you a racist. It's your second, your third, and your fourth. Those two lines, I feel, are the lines that everyone is stepping around and no one wants to talk about.
I want to talk about it.
And that's what frustrates me. We're in a position now in society, in this country, where no one wants to listen. The smartest person in a conversation is the person who listens. So when you talk about black or white, when you talk about race, when you talk about sexism, when you talk about homophobia, I think the most interesting perspective is to sit back and just let that person talk. Because there's nothing I can add to that perspective. And the great thing about this movie is you get the white perspective.
Right.
You hear what he's thinking. You get the black perspective. You hear what she's thinking. Octavia's dealing with a drug-infected son. He's dealing with the loss of his wife and alcoholism. Those are two huge topics that are colliding with this little girl.
But I know I don't wake up in the morning going, oh, I can't wait to go out there and deal with racism. I just want to chill sometimes. Sometimes I just want to relax. But it's painful to see the casualty level that comes out of racism. I mean, you and I both have heard black children walking down the street abusing each other about blackness. Haven't you?
All too often.
Yeah. So this is why we are talking about this stuff, not because... And that's part of the symptoms of white supremacy, to even minimize or trivialize talking about racism, because that keeps it addressed so they can go on and do what they want to do. I'm talking about the people in power who are white.
You're listening to the Parallel Realities podcast, Truth from the Other Side.
Hey, Anthony, did you hear about the fiasco, the anti-Black fiasco that happened on the Howard campus with their middle school program?
I did hear about that, and saddening. I thought about so many things. Number one, the history, just on the campus alone, and the fact that Black people, again displaying some level of self-hate that has us turning on ourselves. But I also thought about the parents who thought they were doing something really good, probably paying an arm and a leg, but can't get what they want because they're kicking teachers who are teaching Black history on a historically Black college campus are being kicked out by Black people. Mind-blowing, to say the least.
The school administration does not want the social studies teachers to teach African American history. We are on the campus of HBCU. We need to know our culture. The school is 90% African American.
And they were all escorted out by police officers because they were trying to teach us things about our African heritage and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, but hey, having worked on college campuses and worked with the faculty of some of the HBCUs, which often were created by white folks initially and or a white Christian doctrine initially, like Morehouse. They just being loyal to whiteness, and it's unconscious, I think. We are defiantly anti-Black sometimes. I mean, they call it the cops.
Yeah.
They called the cops on the teachers and had them handcuffed and taken out of the class by cops in front of the students.
Right.
They were so serious about banning Black history on a Black campus for Black students.
Now, from what I read, they didn't get into detail in terms of what was so unsettling or unnerving or provoked such an insecure reaction from Black people about Black history. I just wonder, what specifically were they teaching?
I don't know. I heard some reference to Kwanzaa or something, but I also just want to say, though, is that even though this is a predominantly Black acted out situation, the context is white supremacy, which is the context where people are trained to be teachers and are trained to be administrators and get their PhDs and blah, blah, blah. We're all trained to regurgitate and master white supremacist perspectives.
Yeah, I think you emphasized a word there a couple of times. I think trained is the operative term there, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just want to be real clear about that, because we get mad at Black people for acting a fool when they're just puppets for a larger agenda that they may or may not realize they've been hypnotized into following.
Right, but that ties so well into this whole discussion on Black people turning on themselves and self-hate. How do we get there? How do we get there? I mean, how do we get there from something like that?
I understand your question in terms of how do we get there. Like I told somebody this morning, anytime you see or hear anti-Black behavior, the source of it is whiteness. It's never a Black sourced or Black originated phenomena. It's always a side effect of internalized white supremacy, always. And everything, as you and I have discussed ad nauseum on some of these shows, every system in this country, and as Dr. Welsing and Neely Fuller often talks about, every human system, whether it's based on sexuality, politics, education, religion, it's all contaminated by the white supremacist agenda of this society, in this country, everything. So how we step out of it is to first admit that.
Well, right. And that seems to be a problem, though, because some of us, the first thing we go to are just the actions that we do to each other. The so-called black-on-black violence, the conflict that we have in our communities. There's never the symptom, or rather the cause for it. It's always just the result. And people are falling over themselves to point that out, but never do they see the main culprit to it all.
Man, I had a meeting with a group of young black men to do some work for black men in this country, which I won't get into the details of that, but I would just want to get to the point. I always talk to black people about unlearning normalized white supremacist anti-black thinking. And I've done this a million times, but this was just 2 days ago at a meeting in Washington, D.C. And I asked a young man who was in his 20s, who happened to be sitting next to me, have you ever heard the term, black people ain't, excrement? But I'm paraphrasing the actual term, which is N-words ain't blankety blank. And he gave me a half smile. And he said, yes. He said, I think I might have said it this morning.
Wow.
And I said to him, very calmly, which is strategic, because instead of going off on him, do you realize what that implies? I said, do you realize that normalized phrase that I've heard all of my life, and I'm twice your age, implies that black people are have less value than excrement, or worse than excrement? And you had a half smile when you said it. Do you realize that we have been taught to have a dysfunctional love affair with defiling ourselves? And he had never, ever thought about that. And that's the point I'm making here, is that, Anthony, we're not thinking about this stuff. We're in an anti-black trance. And when I talked to him about that, of course, it provoked a whole conversation that I'm sure changed his whole life.
Any final comments before we wrap up?
No, man. I'm trying to think of something positive that we discuss. We discuss ending our shows on a high note. Did you hear about Sly?
I did hear about Sly Stone, and it's awfully good news to hear after what he's been going through over the last few years of his life.
Yeah, man. He is slotted to get $5 million. He won a case against his attorney and against the publishers of his music, where he wasn't getting a dime. But my mother told me, and I knew this, but I didn't want to hear it. My mother's an attorney, and she said likely there'll be appeals, and the appeals might last a long time, and hopefully he'll outlive the appeals. So that part kind of, put a little damper on it, but still, he won. And now I hope that George Clinton, who's also fighting to get money for his compositions and the rights and the publishing and some monies and royalties, hopefully he'll have the same outcome, and hopefully he'll also get paid. But it's still good news conceptually.
Sure. It just seems like that's another. I don't mean to throw flames on the good news, but it seems like there's a perpetual battle, especially in the music industry. This has been going on for years for artists to get their due. You talk about jazz musicians back in the day who didn't get it, and in that era from Sly Stone, he didn't get it. And even rappers, to some extent, they haven't seen their royalties. It's very sad to hear about that. Now, maybe I'm confusing. Was there an Unsung? You're familiar with the series Unsung, right? On
yeah.
Was there an Unsung on Sly Stone?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't been able to watch it religiously, and it's one of the only things on TV that I watch when I remember it. Mm-hmm. And I think I would have heard about Sly, but maybe I haven't. But I haven't seen any Sly.
Yeah. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up. But yeah. Well, if you can, and since we're talking about it, Cleo, and some people who are listening may not have a good knowledge of Sly Stone, fill the folks in a bit.
Okay, and I'll try not to be too passionate because I love me some Sly Stone.
Well, passion's good, though. I mean, people know how you really feel, so please people can probably feel it too. So let us know.
Well, the Sly Stone is one of the baddest. I mean, good bad, like Michael Jackson bad. One of the baddest composers and innovators of funk music and pop music that has ever born. And his prime time was during the 70s. He wrote songs like "Hot Fun in the Summertime," "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again," "Stand."
Yeah.
God, "Sing a Simple Song." I mean, some bad tunes. And when I say bad, I mean bad melodically, bad harmonically, bad musically, bad lyrically, bad melodically. He was incredibly talented, and back in his day, he was getting his due, like most people do back in their day.
Right.
It's also he was out of San Francisco, the Bay Area, and was the first famous group that Larry Graham of Graham Central Station, innovative bass player, came out of. And he was just incredibly talented and innovative and a big influence on music, including the likes of Prince and others who are very successful but can't even touch the garment of the great talent and versatility of Sly. And some people may have heard that up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was reported he was living in a van. Oh. And he was living in a van near an area called Leimert Park, which is near where I'm from in Los Angeles. And to have Sly Stone living in a van is like Barack Obama living in a hotel.
Right, I don't mean to laugh, but the great analogy. Right.
I mean, that's insane, man. This dude, anybody who can hear and is not deaf and walking out their house and hearing music, even pop music, they're hearing the shadow of Sly Stone.
If you have any comments, you can email us at parallelrealitiespodcast@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook, and you can follow us on Twitter at Parallel Realities. That's at Parallel Realities. Thanks again, Cleo, and we will talk again next week.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for the conversation.
Okay, be well.